A retired Navy SEAL was never supposed to survive that explosion. The men who planted the bomb believed the Atlantic had erased every trace of the truth. But when a rescue helicopter found Ethan Walker drifting across the freezing sea, one detail changed everything. His aging German Shepherd refused to let anyone touch the mysterious backpack strapped to Ethan's body. Inside it was a secret, powerful enough to bring down an invisible empire. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you love unforgettable stories of courage and loyal dogs, subscribe and stay with us until the very end. The Atlantic wind carried the taste of salt and rain across the lonely island long before sunrise. Most people imagined retirement as quiet mornings, warm coffee, and grandchildren laughing somewhere beyond the porch. Ethan Walker had none of those things. His mornings began with the groan of rusted engines, the sting of cold seawater against cracked hands, and the silent company of one aging German Shepherd who had refused to leave his side through war, loss, and the slow unraveling of a life neither of them had expected. At 35, Ethan looked older than his years. He stood just over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that had once carried military equipment through deserts and mountains across the world. Time had carved sharp lines around his gray-blue eyes, and a faint scar stretched from beneath his left ear toward his collarbone, disappearing beneath the faded flannel shirts he wore almost every day. His dark brown hair had grown longer since leaving the Navy, touched with the first hints of premature gray. A rough beard covered his jaw, giving him the appearance of someone who no longer cared much about mirrors. Yet beneath that weathered face remained the calm discipline that had once made him one of the most respected operators in his SEAL unit. People on the island rarely asked about his past. They knew only that he had served his country, that he had come home carrying invisible wounds heavier than any physical injury, and that he never spoke about the mission that ended his military career. Rumors drifted through the fishing docks from time to time. Some claimed he had saved dozens of lives. Others whispered that he had lost an entire team. Ethan never corrected either version. Silence demanded less energy than memory. The only soul who knew every version of him walked on 4 legs. Rex, an 8-year-old German Shepherd, moved with the steady confidence of a veteran soldier, despite the stiffness beginning to settle into his hips. His thick black and tan coat had lost some of its youthful shine, and a thin white streak now appeared around his muzzle, betraying his age. One ear carried a small notch from an operation years earlier, while an old scar crossed his right shoulder beneath the fur, hidden unless the sunlight struck at the proper angle. His amber eyes remained remarkably alert, constantly studying people before trusting them. During their years together in combat, Rex had learned to detect danger long before humans recognized it, and retirement had done nothing to dull those instincts. Ethan often believed the dog had saved his life more times than anyone would ever know. The cabin where they lived overlooked a narrow harbor on a small island off the coast of Maine. It had once belonged to an elderly fisherman who died without family, leaving the weather-beaten structure to the town in exchange for maintaining the nearby dock. Ethan rented it for almost nothing, because few people wanted a house where winter storms rattled every window and electricity disappeared whenever the sea became angry. Inside, there was little beyond necessity. A worn wooden table, a cast-iron stove, shelves holding mechanical manuals beside old Navy navigation books, a faded photograph face down in a drawer Ethan never opened. Rex's blanket rested beside the fireplace, although the dog preferred sleeping near the front door where he could hear every unfamiliar footstep outside. Their lives had settled into a rhythm built not on comfort, but survival. Each morning, Ethan repaired fishing boats, replaced damaged propellers, welded cracked hulls, or climbed beneath diesel engines that younger mechanics refused to touch. His reputation spread through neighboring islands because he charged less than anyone else and never abandoned a fisherman stranded by broken equipment. Some weeks brought enough work to pay the bills. Other weeks ended with canned soup for dinner and difficult choices postponed until another paycheck arrived. Recently, those choices had become painfully simple. Rex needed medication. The veterinarian on the mainland had diagnosed the dog with degenerative joint disease several months earlier. The medicine slowed the pain enough for Rex to continue walking, but every bottle cost more than Ethan cared to admit. He had quietly skipped replacing his own winter coat and postponed repairing the cabin roof, telling himself those things could wait another season. Rex could not. That morning, the German Shepherd struggled slightly before standing. It lasted only a second, hardly noticeable to anyone unfamiliar with him, but Ethan saw it immediately. He pretended not to. Instead, he crouched beside his old partner, scratching gently beneath the dog's chin. "You don't have to prove anything anymore," he whispered. Rex answered by leaning his head against Ethan's shoulder. No words existed between them, yet understanding flowed effortlessly. It always had. The sound of tires crunching across gravel interrupted the quiet. An aging pickup truck stopped outside the cabin. Behind the wheel sat Thomas Hale, a local fisherman in his early 60s whose weathered face had been shaped by decades beneath harsh Atlantic winds. Thomas possessed the broad hands and thick white beard of a man who had spent more time at sea than on land. Despite his gruff voice, he carried an honest kindness that surfaced whenever neighbors found themselves in trouble. Like many older fishermen, he trusted actions far more than promises, which explained why he respected Ethan without asking questions about military records or forgotten wars. Thomas climbed from the truck, removing his wool cap as Rex approached. "Morning, soldier," he said with a smile, scratching the German Shepherd behind one ear. Rex accepted the greeting after a brief inspection, then returned to Ethan's side. Thomas's expression shifted. "You heard about the old trawler?" Ethan shook his head. "Which one?" "The Margaret Ann." Ethan recognized the name immediately. The fishing vessel had been tied to the eastern dock for nearly a year, abandoned after its owner suffered a stroke. Most mechanics considered the boat beyond saving. "I thought she was finished." "So did everybody else." Thomas folded his arms. "New owner bought her cheap. Wants her running before tomorrow's tide." Ethan frowned. "Tomorrow?" "He'll pay cash." That caught Ethan's attention. "How much?" Thomas named a number large enough to cover several months of Rex's medication. For a brief moment, Ethan said nothing. His instincts whispered that something about the situation felt rushed. Boats left idle for that long rarely returned to sea safely without weeks of careful restoration. Yet another thought immediately followed. The medicine. The bills. The nearly empty envelope hidden inside the kitchen drawer. Thomas seemed to read the conflict on Ethan's face. "I wouldn't ask if there were anyone else I'd trust." Ethan looked toward Rex. The old dog had wandered closer to the truck, but remained unusually still. His ears stood upright. His nose lifted into the wind. He wasn't watching Thomas. He was staring toward the harbor. A faint uneasiness settled inside Ethan's chest. Rex had learned long ago to distinguish ordinary sounds from danger, ordinary strangers from those carrying hidden intentions. Most of the time, Ethan dismissed those reactions as habit, left over from military service. Most of the time. Today felt different. "What is it?" Ethan asked softly. Rex never took his eyes from the distant docks. After several long seconds, the German Shepherd finally looked back, though the alertness remained in his expression. Thomas noticed it too. He sensing another storm? Maybe. But Ethan wasn't convinced. The forecast predicted rough weather by evening, nothing more. Still, experience had taught him that Rex often trusted instincts long before radar trusted data. Thomas reached into his jacket and handed Ethan a folded work order. "The owner's waiting at Pier 7. Says the boat has to leave before sunset." Ethan unfolded the paper slowly. Something about the request felt urgent in ways that had nothing to do with fishing. He glanced once more toward Rex, who remained motionless, eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the old trawler rocking gently against the gray Atlantic water. For reasons he could not explain, the sight made the back of his neck grow cold. Yet he folded the paper, slipped it into his pocket, and quietly said the words that would change everything. "I'll take the job." By noon, the sky had become a dull sheet of steel, pressing low over the Atlantic as Ethan drove toward Pier 7 with Rex sitting quietly beside him. The old German Shepherd rarely appeared restless without reason, and today he never seemed to relax. His ears remained alert, his eyes scanning every corner of the harbor as though searching for someone Ethan could not see. The Margaret Ann looked even worse up close. Rust streaked every inch of her weather-beaten hull, while faded blue paint peeled away in long strips beneath years of salt and neglect. The vessel leaned slightly against the dock, its wooden rails warped by countless winters. She looked less like a fishing boat and more like a survivor that had somehow refused to sink. Standing beside the gangway waited the new owner. Daniel Mercer appeared to be in his early 50s, tall and lean with neatly combed silver hair and an expensive navy raincoat that seemed strangely out of place among fishermen covered in grease and salt water. His clean-shaven face carried the practiced smile of a businessman accustomed to closing deals quickly. Everything about him suggested confidence, yet his pale gray eyes never lingered on another person for very long, as though he feared revealing too much. "You must be Walker," Mercer said, extending a hand. Ethan accepted it. "You were told I needed her running." Mercer nodded. "Nothing complicated, just enough to get me several miles offshore. The rest of the work can wait." That answer made little sense. No fisherman delays repairs once he's at sea. "I'm not fishing." Mercer smiled politely, but offered nothing more. Ethan chose not to press him. People had reasons for keeping secrets. After leaving the Navy, he had become one of them. For nearly 3 hours, he worked beneath the engine housing, while Rex explored every accessible corner of the vessel. The diesel engine had suffered from years of corrosion, but surprisingly little structural damage. Someone had maintained the essential systems shortly before abandoning the boat, an unusual detail Ethan quietly stored away, without mentioning. Several times, Rex stopped near the cargo compartment and stared toward the lower deck. Each time Ethan called him back, each time the dog obeyed, though reluctantly. By late afternoon, the engine finally came alive. The deep rumble echoed across the harbor, drawing approving whistles from nearby fishermen. Mercer looked genuinely relieved. "You've earned every dollar." He handed Ethan a thick, waterproof envelope containing cash exactly as promised. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something close to hope. Rex's medicine, repairs to the cabin roof. Perhaps even a few weeks without calculating every dollar before buying groceries. As Ethan prepared to leave, Mercer hesitated. "One more favor." Ethan looked up. "I need someone familiar with these waters for a short trip beyond the islands. I'm a mechanic." "I know." "The offer doubles." Ethan studied him carefully. Storm clouds continued gathering over the eastern horizon. "It'll take less than 2 hours," Mercer continued. "I'll handle the navigation. I simply don't know these waters well enough." Ethan should have refused. Every instinct built during years as a Navy SEAL whispered that something about the request felt wrong. Nothing Mercer had said matched the behavior of an ordinary boat owner. Then Ethan looked down at Rex. The old dog shifted his weight awkwardly before climbing aboard again. Another bottle of medication. Several more months without pain. Sometimes survival forced people to negotiate with instincts. "Fine," Ethan answered quietly. They departed just before sunset. The harbor disappeared behind them, while cold Atlantic waves rolled beneath the aging trawler. Wind strengthened steadily, carrying distant thunder across the open water. Mercer remained strangely occupied, with a handheld GPS device instead of the horizon, occasionally comparing its display with handwritten coordinates folded inside his pocket. Ethan noticed everything. Military habits never truly disappeared. "You expecting someone?" he asked. Mercer hesitated. No. It was an answer spoken too quickly. Rex suddenly stood. His ears locked toward the western side of the vessel. A low growl escaped his chest. Ethan turned instinctively. Nothing. Only gray water stretching endlessly beneath darkening clouds. Then another sound reached them. An engine. Fast. Very fast. Before Ethan could identify its direction, a woman's voice shattered the wind. "Help me!" Both men spun toward the port side. A small inflatable craft rose violently over the waves. Inside stood a woman soaked from head to toe, struggling to keep control as the sea hammered the tiny boat. She appeared to be around 30 years old, with shoulder-length dark hair, plastered against her face by rain and seawater. Her athletic build suggested years of demanding physical training, rather than ordinary office work. A deep cut along her forehead allowed blood to mix with rain as it streamed across determined green eyes that refused to surrender despite obvious exhaustion. She wasn't panicking. She was fighting. The inflatable slammed against the Margaret Ann. Without waiting for permission, the woman grabbed the rail and pulled herself aboard with remarkable speed. Rex barked once, not in aggression, in recognition that danger had arrived. The woman staggered toward Ethan. She carried only one possession: a black, military-grade waterproof backpack secured tightly across her shoulders. Her breathing came in sharp bursts. "They're coming," she whispered. Ethan frowned. "Who?" She ignored the question. Instead, she unclipped the backpack with trembling hands and forced it into Ethan's arms. "No matter what happens." She struggled to steady herself. "Don't let anyone open it." "What is this?" "I can't explain." "You'd better. There isn't time." Her eyes searched his face with desperate certainty. "If you ever wore that uniform." She glanced briefly toward the faded navy tattoo on Ethan's forearm. "Then, trust me just once." Before Ethan could respond, Rex exploded into furious barking. This time, the warning was unmistakable. Another engine. Louder. Closer. Mercer turned pale. From behind the waves emerged a black high-speed boat, cutting across the water with terrifying speed. It carried no registration numbers, no fishing equipment, no navigation lights, despite the approaching storm. Its course led directly toward them. The woman whispered only 2 words. "They found us." Everything inside Ethan shifted. Years of training surged back with breathtaking clarity. His posture changed. His breathing slowed. Every movement became controlled. "Get down!" he shouted. The impact came before anyone could move. The speeding vessel crashed into the Margaret Ann with explosive force. Wood splintered. Metal screamed. Both boats lurched violently as men were thrown across the deck. Rex reached Ethan first. The old German Shepherd slammed against him, knocking him away from collapsing equipment. A second later, the world erupted. An explosion ripped upward from beneath the engine compartment, throwing fire, shattered steel, and burning fuel high into the storm-dark sky. Heat swallowed the deck. The blast hurled Ethan backward. His final conscious thought was not of himself. It was of Rex. He reached blindly through smoke and flames. Strong jaws seized his sleeve. Then freezing Atlantic water consumed them both. Darkness. Silence. Time disappeared. No one knew exactly how long the storm carried them. 2 days later, after the weather finally cleared, a United States Navy search helicopter spotted something drifting between broken sections of a shattered fishing vessel. A rescue swimmer descended immediately. What he found left even experienced sailors speechless. Ethan Walker lay unconscious across a floating section of the ruined hull, his skin pale from exposure, his pulse barely detectable. Curled tightly against him was Rex. The exhausted German Shepherd had positioned his own body across Ethan's chest, shielding him from relentless wind and freezing rain, despite his own obvious injuries. The dog's breathing was shallow. His paws were torn and bleeding. Yet the moment the rescue swimmer reached toward Ethan, Rex lifted his head. A warning growl emerged. Only then did the rescuer notice the black waterproof backpack still tightly secured across Ethan's back. As another sailor attempted to remove it before the helicopter lift, Rex lunged despite his exhaustion, placing himself between the stranger's hands and the backpack with unwavering determination. No command had been given. No training exercise remained, only loyalty. The crew exchanged confused glances before deciding to leave the backpack untouched. Moments later, Ethan and Rex were lifted into the helicopter together. As the rescue crew secured Ethan onto the medical stretcher, an almost inaudible electronic tone echoed from inside the waterproof backpack. One tiny green light blinked, then another. Far across the ocean, inside a windowless room illuminated only by rows of silent computer monitors, An encrypted system that had remained dormant suddenly awakened. A single line of text appeared across the largest screen. Target Walker. Alive. The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors echoed through the quiet corridors of the Naval Medical Center, replacing the roar of waves that had nearly claimed Ethan Walker's life. Outside, dawn painted the windows with pale gray light, but inside the intensive care wing, time seemed suspended between hope and uncertainty. Ethan had not regained consciousness. Bruises darkened the left side of his face, while fresh bandages covered cuts along his arms and shoulders. An oxygen cannula rested beneath his nose, and intravenous lines disappeared beneath crisp, white hospital sheets. Though his breathing had become steady, his expression remained distant, as if some part of him were still drifting through the freezing Atlantic, where memory and instinct had merged into survival. Doctors believed his condition would improve. They could not explain why he had survived, nor could they explain how an exhausted 8-year-old German shepherd had managed to protect him for nearly 2 days in open water. Rex refused to leave. The old military working dog lay directly outside Ethan's room, his injured paws wrapped in clean veterinary bandages provided by the base's emergency animal care team. A shallow cut crossed the bridge of his muzzle, and exhaustion weighed heavily on his aging body. Even so, he remained alert. His amber eyes tracked every person who entered the hallway. His ears twitched at every unfamiliar sound. Several nurses had quietly nicknamed him the Guardian. One of them, Lieutenant Emily Carter, understood loyalty better than most. 38 years old, Emily possessed the calm confidence of someone who had spent nearly 2 decades treating wounded sailors and Marines. She stood of average height with chestnut hair tied neatly beneath her navy cap, warm brown eyes, and a composed expression that rarely revealed panic. Years of emergency medicine had taught her to speak gently, even during chaos, and she instinctively respected both soldiers and the invisible burdens they carried. Each morning she brought fresh water for Rex before beginning her rounds. The German shepherd accepted the bowl politely, but never moved farther than a few feet from Ethan's door. "He hasn't slept properly," Emily quietly remarked to another nurse. "He thinks he'll miss something." The second nurse glanced toward the dog. "I've never seen anything like it." Neither had Emily. Military working dogs often formed extraordinary bonds with their handlers, but Rex's behavior extended beyond training. He wasn't simply guarding Ethan. He was waiting. The black waterproof backpack rested inside a transparent evidence container in a secure storage room only 2 corridors away. Following Navy protocol, rescuers had cataloged it as personal property, recovered with the survivor. Yet, something unusual had happened during intake. The moment 2 security officers attempted to separate the backpack from Ethan's belongings, Rex had broken free from exhausted handlers and placed himself squarely between the officers and the equipment. He had not bitten. He had not attacked. He had simply refused. His unwavering posture, fixed stare, and low warning growl carried the unmistakable authority of a military dog issuing a final command. The officers wisely backed away. Word spread quickly across the base. By mid-morning, another visitor arrived. Commander Nathan Briggs walked through the secured entrance, carrying a slim electronic tablet beneath one arm. At 54 years old, Briggs had spent most of his career inside naval intelligence rather than on battlefields. Tall and lean, with closely cropped silver hair and narrow green eyes that missed almost nothing, he projected quiet authority instead of theatrical confidence. Deep lines around his mouth suggested decades of difficult decisions rather than old age. Colleagues respected him because he rarely spoke before observing every available fact. He entered Ethan's room first. The patient remained unconscious. Then Briggs studied the chart. Former Navy SEAL, honorably discharged, civilian occupation, marine engine mechanic, no recent government contracts. Nothing explained why an encrypted signal had activated from property found attached to him. Emily approached. "Commander? D. I'd like to see the recovered backpack." She nodded. "It has already been moved to secured storage." "And the dog?" Emily smiled faintly. "He's outside." Briggs opened the door. Rex lifted his head immediately. The German shepherd did not bark. Instead, he stared directly into Briggs' eyes, with the calm calculation of a soldier evaluating another soldier. Briggs slowly crouched several feet away. "You've seen men like me before, haven't you?" Rex remained still. No growl, no movement. Only observation. Briggs recognized the behavior instantly. "This isn't fear," he murmured. Emily looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "He's assessing whether I'm a threat." Briggs had worked alongside military working dogs during overseas intelligence operations years earlier. They remembered scent, posture, confidence, hesitation. More importantly, experienced dogs often reacted differently toward individuals whose intentions conflicted with their actions. Rex neither accepted nor rejected him. The commander quietly considered that a compliment. Minutes later, Briggs entered the secure property room. The black backpack appeared ordinary at first glance. Military-grade waterproof fabric, minimal exterior markings, no visible manufacturer. Professional stitching. Yet the weight felt slightly uneven when he lifted it. Not heavy, balanced, purposefully designed. He carefully examined every seam without forcing it open. Near the lower compartment, his fingers discovered something almost invisible. A reinforced composite panel hidden beneath the fabric. Not commercial. Military. Briggs' expression changed. He requested a portable imaging scanner. Within minutes, technicians rolled specialized equipment into the room. The scan revealed what ordinary inspection could not. Behind multiple protective layers rested a compact electronic device, unlike standard civilian equipment. Shielded wiring surrounded what appeared to be a heavily encrypted communications module, integrated into the structure of the backpack itself. One technician frowned. "I've never seen this model." Briggs nodded slowly. "Neither have I." "But it's military?" Without question, the technician looked toward the unconscious patient's paperwork. "Did the former SEAL receive classified equipment before retirement?" "No record indicates that." Briggs studied Ethan's service history again. Everything remained clean. Too clean. Someone had intentionally placed this backpack into Ethan Walker's possession. The question was why. He immediately issued one instruction. "No one opens it." The technician looked surprised. "We should inspect the contents." "Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with." Briggs had witnessed enough covert operations to recognize dangerous possibilities. Sophisticated intelligence devices sometimes carried anti-tamper mechanisms capable of permanently destroying sensitive data. Others silently transmitted alerts the moment unauthorized access occurred. Whatever rested inside this backpack had already announced itself to someone. He simply didn't know to whom. Back outside Ethan's room, Rex suddenly lifted his head. His ears rotated toward the far end of the corridor. Someone unfamiliar had entered the floor. The old German shepherd slowly rose, despite the pain in his injured legs. His gaze remained fixed on the approaching footsteps. Every instinct sharpened. Every muscle tightened. Someone was coming. Someone who did not belong. The footsteps grew louder, measured and confident, accompanied by the quiet rustle of expensive suit jackets rather than military uniforms. 4 individuals rounded the corner together, each displaying federal identification clipped neatly to their belts. At first glance, they appeared entirely legitimate. Their dark business attire was immaculate despite the coastal weather, and every movement suggested professional discipline. The man leading them introduced himself before anyone asked. Special Agent Richard Collins. Federal Protective Operations. Collins was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with neatly trimmed sandy blonde hair and a square jaw that gave him the appearance of a former athlete. His blue eyes remained steady, but something about his smile never reached them. He spoke politely, almost warmly, yet his tone carried the quiet expectation that people would comply without hesitation. Behind him stood a woman several years younger, tall and slender, with black hair pulled tightly into a low bun. Her sharp cheekbones and controlled posture projected absolute professionalism. Unlike Collins, she never smiled. She observed exits, cameras, and security personnel before acknowledging anyone else. The remaining 2 men stayed silent, behaving more like bodyguards than investigators. Commander Nathan Briggs stepped into the hallway before they reached Ethan's room. "Can I help you?" Collins produced official-looking credentials. "We're here to assume custody of Mr. Ethan Walker and all recovered evidence connected to the maritime incident." Briggs accepted the identification without comment. He examined every detail. The credentials appeared convincing. Too convincing. Years inside naval intelligence had taught him that counterfeit documents often looked more perfect than genuine ones. "What agency did you say?" "Federal Protective Operations." "I wasn't informed. Another agency had jurisdiction." Collins maintained the same pleasant expression. "The matter has been elevated." "I haven't received those orders." "They're classified." Briggs looked up slowly. "So are mine." Silence settled over the corridor. Neither man raised his voice. Neither moved. Yet every nurse passing nearby instinctively sensed the invisible contest unfolding between two professionals accustomed to authority. Emily Carter watched from the nurse's station, pretending to organize patient files while listening carefully. Collins folded his credentials. "We're only trying to avoid unnecessary delays." "And I'm trying to protect my patient," Briggs answered evenly. "The patient is unconscious." Exactly. The conversation remained courteous, but every sentence became another layer of distrust. Collins finally glanced toward Ethan's closed room. "We'll need access to the recovered backpack." Briggs answered immediately. "No." The first crack appeared in Collins' composure. "I'm afraid that isn't your decision." "It is while Mr. Walker remains under Navy medical authority." "Aye. The device belongs to the federal government." "You've confirmed there's a device inside?" Collins hesitated for less than a second. It was enough. Briggs had deliberately offered no information about the backpack's contents, yet Collins had responded as though he already knew. The commander quietly returned the identification. "I'll be contacting Washington through secure channels before releasing anything." The smile disappeared from Collins' face. "That may delay an important investigation." "Then it will delay." Without another word, Briggs turned and walked back. The four visitors exchanged brief glances before leaving the corridor. Only after the elevator doors closed did Briggs speak into his encrypted military radio. "Increased security around intensive care. No exceptions. Nobody touches Walker or the recovered property without my authorization." Within minutes, two armed Navy security officers quietly took positions near the hallway entrance. Evening settled over the medical center. Rain tapped gently against reinforced windows, while most visitors departed for the night. The daytime bustle faded into the quiet rhythm unique to hospitals after dark, where whispered conversations replaced hurried footsteps, and every sound seemed amplified. Ethan remained unconscious. His fingers twitched once. Nothing more. Doctors considered it encouraging. Rex noticed anyway. The German shepherd slowly rested his head against the side of Ethan's bed before returning to the doorway. Shortly after midnight, another figure entered the floor. Unlike the visitors earlier, this man wore faded blue maintenance coveralls and pushed a janitorial equipment cart. He appeared to be around 50 years old, with thinning brown hair beneath a work cap and a tired face marked by years of ordinary labor. His shoulders slouched naturally, and he avoided eye contact with hospital staff, exactly as countless maintenance workers did every day. He cleaned one empty room, then another. Nothing appeared unusual, yet Rex watched him continuously. The dog did not bark. He simply stared. The maintenance worker eventually stopped beside an electrical access panel directly opposite Ethan's room. He glanced once down the hallway. No one seemed to notice. Slowly, he knelt. From inside his toolbox, he removed what looked like an ordinary diagnostic meter. It wasn't. Instead of connecting it to hospital wiring, he carefully detached a ceiling communication cover and revealed a narrow bundle of network cables. Hidden beneath the meter rested an object no larger than a deck of playing cards, a matte black electronic module equipped with a tiny blinking blue indicator. His movements became faster, practiced, almost rehearsed. He attached the device behind the panel. One final adjustment, then he reached to replace the cover. A deep growl rolled through the silent hallway. The man froze. Rex stood perfectly still outside Ethan's room. Every hair along his back had risen. His amber eyes locked onto the supposed maintenance worker with unmistakable intensity. Emily Carter looked up from her charting station. "Rex?" The growl became louder, not frightened, not uncertain, certain. The maintenance worker slowly turned. For a brief instant, his calm expression vanished. Calculation replaced surprise. He and the German shepherd stared at one another across the corridor. Rex took one deliberate step forward, then another. His injured legs trembled, but he never stopped. Emily immediately realized something was terribly wrong. "Sir?" she called. "Can I help you with something?" The man smiled too quickly. "Routine maintenance." Emily frowned. "At 1 in the morning?" He offered no answer. Instead, he closed the electrical panel and reached for his cart. Rex barked. Once. Sharp. Explosive. The sound echoed through the corridor, drawing 2 Navy security officers from the hallway entrance. The maintenance worker's eyes flicked toward the approaching guards. For the first time that night, genuine tension crossed his face. Commander Briggs emerged from a nearby office, instantly reading the scene without anyone needing to explain it. His gaze moved from Rex to the maintenance worker, to the freshly closed communication panel. "Nobody move," Briggs ordered calmly. Every instinct told him the old military dog had not mistaken an innocent maintenance employee for a threat, and Rex had never looked more certain. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the hospital window, casting pale golden reflections across the quiet room where Ethan Walker had remained suspended between consciousness and memory for nearly 3 days. The rhythmic sound of medical monitors no longer felt distant, but strangely familiar, as though each electronic pulse were slowly guiding him back toward the world he had almost left behind. His body felt impossibly heavy. Every muscle protested, even the smallest movement, and beneath the dull ache in his ribs lingered a deeper pain, one that belonged not to broken flesh, but to fragments of a past that refused to assemble themselves into a complete picture. His eyelids finally opened. The white ceiling above him appeared blurred at first, then gradually sharpened into focus. The unfamiliar scent of antiseptic replaced the smell of salt water, diesel fuel, and burning timber that had haunted the edge of his dreams. Ethan instinctively tried to sit upright, only to feel a sharp pain shoot across his chest. He clenched his jaw and fell back against the pillow, breathing carefully until the pain subsided. The first thought entering his mind was not about himself. It was Rex. Before he could speak, a familiar sound answered the question forming inside him. Soft claws tapped rapidly across the polished hospital floor. The old German shepherd appeared in the doorway almost instantly. Despite the bandages still wrapped around both front paws, Rex crossed the room with surprising determination. His amber eyes, weary from days without proper rest, brightened the moment they met Ethan's. He stopped beside the bed, carefully resting his muzzle against Ethan's arm without applying pressure to the injuries. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. A wave of relief swept through him, more powerful than any medication. "You stubborn old soldier," he whispered hoarsely, running trembling fingers through the dog's thick fur. "You stayed." Rex answered only by leaning closer. For several quiet seconds, neither of them moved. Years of shared danger had created a language requiring no words, and that silent conversation now carried more comfort than anything doctors could have offered. The reunion was interrupted gently by Lieutenant Emily Carter, who entered carrying a chart and a relieved smile. The tension that had settled over her face during the previous days eased immediately upon seeing Ethan awake. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You gave everyone quite a scare." Ethan attempted a faint smile. "How long?" "Almost 3 days." His expression changed. "The boat?" Emily hesitated. "It sank. The others?" "We haven't confirmed anyone else survived." Silence settled over the room. Ethan lowered his gaze toward the blanket, covering his legs. Experience had taught him that unanswered questions often carried worse possibilities than confirmed losses. He had lived through enough military notifications to understand how easily lives disappeared beneath a single sentence, beginning with the words, "We're still investigating." Commander Nathan Briggs entered a few minutes later after receiving word that Ethan had awakened. Unlike their previous meeting, Briggs did not begin with questions. Instead, he quietly pulled a chair beside the hospital bed and studied the former SEAL with patient curiosity. Up close, Ethan noticed details he had overlooked before. Briggs's calm green eyes never wandered unnecessarily. His posture remained relaxed, yet every movement suggested someone constantly measuring risks. It reminded Ethan of veteran intelligence officers he had occasionally encountered during overseas deployments, people who rarely fired weapons themselves, but often knew more than those carrying them. "I'm glad you're awake," Briggs began. "There are some things I'd like to understand, but your health comes first." Ethan nodded. "I'll answer what I can." Briggs placed a photograph on the bedside table. It showed the black, waterproof backpack. "Do you recognize it?" Ethan stared at the image. Nothing happened. He frowned. "I've seen it." "When?" "I don't know." Briggs leaned back without interrupting. Memory could not be forced. Ethan continued staring. His heartbeat slowly increased. The photograph seemed ordinary, yet something beneath conscious thought stirred uneasily, like an object slowly rising through dark water. Ethan pressed fingers against his temple. "I remember carrying it." "Did it belong to you?" "No." The answer arrived immediately. Certain, without hesitation. It wasn't mine. Briggs exchanged a brief glance with Emily before returning his attention to Ethan. "Then, whose was it?" Ethan closed his eyes. Darkness surrounded him. At first he heard only waves crashing against wood. Then came rain, wind, the vibration of an engine. Images surfaced, without order. Splintered boards, the Margaret Ann, Mercer's worried face, Rex barking. Another engine approaching. The memories broke apart again before becoming complete. "I can't," Ethan whispered. "Don't force it," Briggs replied. "Sometimes, trauma protects itself." Throughout the afternoon, physicians performed neurological examinations while Briggs quietly arranged additional security around Ethan's room. The attempted surveillance discovered the previous night had transformed a mysterious maritime accident into something far more serious. No one outside a carefully selected circle was informed that Ethan had regained consciousness. Meanwhile, the backpack remained unopened. Military imaging had confirmed the presence of sophisticated encrypted hardware hidden inside its reinforced structure, but every specialist who examined it reached the same conclusion. Attempting to force entry without understanding its design could permanently destroy whatever information remained within. Late that evening, after medication had eased most of Ethan's physical pain, he drifted into a lighter sleep. That was when the memories returned. Not as scattered images this time. As a complete moment. He was standing aboard the Margaret Ann while dark clouds gathered overhead. Daniel Mercer was below deck, checking navigation equipment. Rex stood near the railing, staring into rough seas with unusual intensity. Then she appeared, the woman from the inflatable boat. Only now Ethan saw details his conscious mind had overlooked during the chaos. She looked to be around 30 years old. Her athletic frame leaned from years of physical training rather than fashion or vanity. Rain had soaked her dark hair against her face, but her green eyes remained remarkably steady despite the blood running from a wound near her forehead. There had been fear in those eyes, certainly, but it was not fear for herself. It was the desperate urgency of someone carrying responsibility, far greater than her own survival. She had seized Ethan's forearm with surprising strength. "You were Navy," she had said, after noticing the faded tattoo partly visible beneath his sleeve. Ethan had instinctively answered with silence. She had continued anyway. "I don't have time to explain who I am." He remembered asking, "Who's chasing you?" She looked toward the approaching horizon instead of answering. "They'll kill anyone," carrying this. Then she removed the waterproof backpack from her shoulders and pressed it firmly into his hands. If I don't make it, her voice had almost disappeared beneath the rising wind. Promise me one thing. Ethan had frowned. What? No matter what happens. She tightened his grip around the straps. Don't let anyone open this until you know who you can trust. The memory ended exactly there. Ethan woke with a sharp breath, his pulse racing. For the first time since regaining consciousness, he remembered why the backpack had been in his possession. He still had no idea who the woman was, but he now knew one thing, with absolute certainty. She had entrusted him with something important enough to die protecting. The dream refused to leave Ethan, even after he opened his eyes. The woman's face lingered with startling clarity, while every other detail surrounding the explosion remained fractured. He could still feel the weight of the waterproof backpack in his hands, and the desperate urgency in her voice. She had not pleaded for her own life. She had pleaded for the survival of whatever rested inside the bag. That difference unsettled him far more than the memory itself. Commander Nathan Briggs returned shortly after sunrise, carrying neither files nor questions at first. He quietly observed Ethan sitting upright for the first time since the rescue while Rex rested beside the hospital bed, his head lying across Ethan's feet as though making certain the former SEAL would not disappear again. Briggs had spent enough years interviewing survivors to recognize when memory had begun returning on its own. Pushing too hard often caused witnesses to retreat deeper into confusion. Waiting, however, sometimes allowed the truth to emerge naturally. You remembered something, Briggs said calmly. Ethan nodded. I remember how I got the backpack. Briggs remained silent, inviting him to continue. It belonged to a woman. She came aboard minutes before the explosion. She wasn't asking for help. She was looking for someone she thought she could trust. Did she tell you her name? No. Did she identify the people chasing her? No. Ethan paused, rubbing his forehead as another fragment surfaced. She recognized I had served in the Navy. She saw the tattoo on my arm. That's why she chose me. Briggs absorbed every word without interruption. None of the details contradicted the physical evidence recovered from the wreckage. DTM. In fact, they explained one question that had troubled investigators since the helicopter rescue. Why a retired mechanic would willingly risk his life protecting a military-grade backpack that clearly did not belong to him. Emily Carter entered briefly to check Ethan's condition before quietly leaving them alone again. She noticed something different in the room. Ethan's fear had not disappeared, but uncertainty had begun giving way to determination. For the first time since awakening, he was thinking like the operator he had once been, instead of the patient lying in a hospital bed. Briggs finally placed the sealed backpack on a stainless steel examination table several feet away. Navy engineers had constructed a protective isolation enclosure around it after confirming the hidden electronics were still active. Multiple cables connected the enclosure to specialized diagnostic equipment rather than forcing direct access to the device itself. We still haven't opened it, Briggs explained. Your memory may be the safest key we have. Ethan slowly approached the table, every movement reminding him that his body had not fully recovered. Rex immediately stood and followed without hesitation, positioning himself between Ethan and the backpack, before relaxing only after Ethan gently rested a hand on his neck. Easy, Ethan whispered. It's all right. The German shepherd slowly stepped aside. A civilian cryptographic specialist waited beside the equipment. Doctor. Olivia Bennett was a woman in her early 40s, with shoulder-length auburn hair, pale skin, and intelligent gray eyes that reflected years spent solving problems rather than seeking recognition. She possessed the quiet patience common among gifted researchers, speaking carefully and rarely making claims she could not prove. During her career, she had helped develop secure military encryption systems, but even she admitted this device looked unlike anything she had previously encountered. I've been studying the signal it transmitted after your rescue, Olivia explained. It isn't continuously broadcasting. It remains almost completely dormant until very specific conditions are met. Can you open it? I could force it. She shook her head before Ethan could respond. I also believe that would permanently erase whatever's inside. Instead of dismantling the backpack, Olivia connected a passive interface capable of reading only external system responses. Lines of encrypted data began flowing across multiple monitors, most of them meaningless to anyone except trained specialists. She entered several harmless diagnostic commands. The device rejected each one without changing its security state. Then, something unexpected happened. The backpack responded to Ethan's presence. Not dramatically. Simply enough for one small indicator on the screen to change from inactive gray to soft green. Olivia frowned. It recognizes proximity. Briggs folded his arms. So, whoever designed it expected Mr. Walker to be near it. No, Ethan answered quietly. I don't think it expected me. He looked down at the backpack. I think it expected the person who gave it to me. The room fell silent. Olivia continued, carefully examining the limited data now available. Although the encrypted contents remained inaccessible, fragments of directory information became visible through the passive interface. Most file names consisted only of meaningless numerical strings. One folder, however, appeared differently. Instead of random numbers, it carried a title. Fallen. Briggs looked toward Olivia. Can you open only the directory? I'll try. She proceeded with extreme caution, reading only metadata without touching the encrypted files themselves. The directory slowly expanded across the screen. Dozens of entries appeared. Each entry contained nothing more than a name and an identification number. No photographs, no biographies, only names. Briggs immediately recognized several. His expression hardened. Ethan noticed. You know them. Briggs answered after several long seconds. I knew of them. He stepped closer to the monitor. The first name belonged to a Navy SEAL, officially killed during an operation in Eastern Europe, nearly 11 years earlier. The second was a Marine Force recon officer whose funeral had been attended by senior military leadership. The third had belonged to an Air Force special tactics operator, declared dead after a helicopter crash. One by one, more names filled the display. Army, Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, intelligence operatives. Every individual had one thing in common. Official records listed them as deceased. Olivia slowly turned toward Briggs. These can't be random. They aren't. Briggs' normally steady voice carried an unfamiliar weight. I personally reviewed 2 of these casualty reports. Ethan stared at the screen. Something inside him resisted what logic insisted must be true. If they're dead. Briggs completed the thought. They shouldn't appear together inside an encrypted military archive. Olivia continued examining the metadata. Another column gradually finished loading. Beside every name appeared the same status. Active. No one spoke. The word seemed impossible. Not missing. Not archived. Not historical. Active. Briggs immediately requested secure access to classified military personnel databases. Minutes later, the response arrived. Every official government record still listed the individuals as killed in action. Every family had received military honors. Every funeral had taken place. Every death certificate remained valid. Yet the encrypted directory hidden inside the backpack insisted otherwise. The room became painfully quiet as the impossible settled over everyone present. Ethan looked once more at the names scrolling across the monitor. He had expected secrets. He had expected corruption. He had even expected evidence of espionage. He had never imagined the backpack would claim that dozens of America's finest operators, men and women the nation had mourned for years, had never truly disappeared at all. According to the only evidence now before them, they were still alive. 3 days after awakening, Ethan Walker stood once again on the weather-beaten dock, overlooking the gray Atlantic. The cold wind rolling in from the Gulf of Maine carried the same mixture of salt, diesel, and seaweed that had greeted him every morning before the explosion. Yet nothing felt familiar anymore. His ribs still ached beneath every deep breath, and the healing cuts along his forearms reminded him that survival often came with a debt. Beside him, Rex leaned against his leg for balance, as much as companionship. The old German shepherd had recovered enough to walk without bandages, although a slight stiffness remained in his stride. Ethan noticed it immediately. Rex noticed Ethan pretending not to. Commander Nathan Briggs watched the pair, from several steps away, without interrupting the quiet moment. During his years in naval intelligence, Briggs had learned that recovering the truth sometimes required returning to the place where everything had gone wrong. Official investigators had already completed their initial search around the wreck site, but the discovery inside the backpack had changed the significance of the explosion. What had once appeared to be a tragic maritime accident had become the opening move in something carefully orchestrated. "The Coast Guard released the area yesterday," Briggs said. "Most people believe the storm scattered everything worth finding." Ethan kept his eyes on the ocean. "And you don't?" "No." Briggs handed him a waterproof chart, marked with several coordinates. The current carried part of the wreck farther east than expected. Sonar picked up debris that wasn't examined during the first recovery. Ethan folded the chart without looking at it. "I want to go." "I assumed you would." The commander had arranged a small civilian salvage vessel rather than a military patrol boat. The fewer people who knew where they were heading, the better. Only 4 individuals boarded that morning: Ethan, Rex, Briggs, and the boat's captain. Captain Samuel O'Connor was a 62-year-old commercial salvage diver whose reputation along the Maine coastline had been built over 4 decades beneath cold Atlantic waters. Thick white hair escaped from beneath a faded wool cap, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a deeply weathered face permanently darkened by wind and sun. His shoulders remained broad despite his age, and his quiet manner reflected someone who had learned patience from thousands of hours underwater. He rarely wasted words and trusted observation more than conversation. Briggs had selected him because he asked very few questions. "If you're expecting a miracle," Samuel said while guiding the vessel away from the harbor, "the sea doesn't hand those out often." Ethan looked toward the endless gray horizon. "I'm not looking for a miracle." "What are you looking for?" "The truth." Samuel nodded once. "In my experience, that's usually harder to recover." The journey lasted less than 90 minutes. Heavy clouds drifted low above the Atlantic, but unlike the violent storm that had nearly killed them, today's sea remained deceptively calm. Long rolling swells lifted the salvage boat gently, while gulls circled overhead, occasionally disappearing into banks of drifting fog. As the GPS guided them toward the marked position, Ethan found himself staring into the water with unexpected hesitation. Memory returned in fragments. He recognized the distant rock formations, the current, even the direction of the wind. Somewhere beneath those dark waves lay the final moments of several lives, including one woman whose name he still did not know. Rex suddenly stood near the rail. His nose lifted into the cold breeze. Unlike before, he wasn't reacting with alarm. He was searching. Samuel noticed first. "He remembers this place." "He does," Ethan answered quietly. "And dogs remember scents over water longer than people think." The sonar monitor interrupted the conversation. A broken outline gradually emerged across the display. Samuel slowed the engines. "There she is." Everyone gathered around the screen. Nearly 100 feet below the surface rested the shattered remains of the Margaret Ann. The explosion had torn the vessel into multiple sections rather than allowing it to sink intact. Large portions of the hull lay scattered across the seabed like pieces of a forgotten puzzle. Ethan studied the image silently. Something immediately felt wrong. Fishing boats that struck submerged rocks or sank during storms usually broke apart in predictable ways. Years repairing damaged vessels had taught him exactly how wood, steel, and engines behaved under enormous pressure. This wreck didn't match those patterns. Samuel prepared the remotely operated underwater vehicle before lowering it into the sea. The compact machine, equipped with powerful lights and high-definition cameras, descended slowly through the dark water, while everyone watched the monitor inside the cabin. The beam of light swept across broken timbers, twisted propeller blades, fragments of fishing nets. Then the engine compartment came into view. Ethan leaned closer. "Stop." Samuel froze the camera. "What do you see?" "The bulkhead." Briggs narrowed his eyes. "I don't follow." Ethan pointed toward a jagged section of torn steel surrounding what had once been the engine room. If the diesel engine exploded because of mechanical failure, the metal should be bent outward from the engine itself. And? It isn't. He traced another section on the screen. The blast started outside the engine housing. Silence filled the cabin. Samuel slowly zoomed in. The damage became unmistakably clear. Several steel support beams had been forced inward before tearing apart. Burn patterns radiated from beneath the floor instead of above the engine block. Ethan's voice remained calm. The engine wasn't the source. Briggs finished the thought. Someone planted an explosive. No one argued. Years of intelligence work had taught Briggs to distrust coincidence, but even he had hoped there might still be another explanation. There wasn't. The Margaret Ann had not simply exploded. It had been destroyed. Samuel carefully guided the underwater vehicle deeper into the debris field. "If someone planted explosives," he murmured, "they probably wanted to make sure nothing survived." The camera drifted between broken sections of the hull. Schools of cod moved lazily through shattered beams, now becoming part of the ocean floor. Seaweed had already begun wrapping itself around twisted metal, as though nature intended to erase every trace of violence. Then Rex barked. Everyone turned. The old German shepherd stood rigidly facing the starboard side of the vessel, staring toward the water rather than the monitor. His ears remained fixed. His breathing quickened. Ethan stepped beside him. "What is it, partner?" Rex gave another short bark before looking back toward Ethan. Samuel adjusted the underwater camera toward the direction, corresponding with Rex's line of sight. At first, the screen showed only darkness. Then the lights reached something unnaturally straight. Not rock. Not wreckage. A massive rectangular outline rested half-buried beneath layers of sand and sediment, several yards away from the remains of the Margaret Ann. Samuel instinctively reduced the vehicle's speed. "That's not part of the fishing boat." Briggs stared at the image without blinking. No. The floodlights brightened. More of the object emerged from the darkness. Steel walls, reinforced corners, industrial locking bars still visible beneath marine growth. It was far too large to belong aboard an aging trawler. Ethan felt a chill unrelated to the cold Atlantic air. Whatever had destroyed the Margaret Ann, someone had been willing to kill to keep it hidden beneath the sea. No one spoke for several seconds. The only sounds inside the salvage vessel were the soft hum of electronic equipment and the rhythmic splash of waves against the hull. On the monitor, the rectangular object remained partially buried beneath years of sand and marine sediment, its sharp edges standing in unnatural contrast to the scattered remains of the Margaret Ann. Ethan felt the same instinctive tension he had experienced countless times during military operations. Whenever something looked too carefully hidden, it usually had been. Captain Samuel O'Connor carefully maneuvered the remotely operated vehicle closer. Powerful floodlights illuminated more of the object, revealing thick steel walls reinforced by corrosion-resistant ribs. Marine growth covered much of its surface, yet several industrial locking mechanisms remained visible. Samuel exhaled slowly. "That's a shipping container," he said. "Not a fishing crate. Not something that accidentally drifted here." Commander Briggs folded his arms while studying the live video feed. "Could the current have carried it after the explosion?" Samuel shook his head immediately. "Not one this size. It weighs several tons even when empty. Once it settled into the seabed, the ocean wouldn't move it very far." Ethan's attention shifted from the container to the surrounding debris field. The wreckage of the Margaret Ann had not fallen randomly. Pieces closest to the container appeared more heavily damaged than those farther away. The pattern suddenly made sense. "The boat wasn't simply destroyed," Ethan said quietly. "It was destroyed here." Briggs looked at him. You think someone wanted to protect whatever's inside that container? I think the Margaret Ann came too close to it. The possibility settled heavily over everyone aboard. Samuel slowly guided the underwater vehicle around the container. On one side, a large section of seabed had been disturbed, exposing part of an old anchoring system bolted directly into bedrock. The container had not been lost at sea. It had been deliberately placed there. Briggs immediately recorded the coordinates. "No one outside this boat learns about this," he said. "Until we understand what we're looking at, this location remains classified." The remotely operated vehicle extended its mechanical arm and gently brushed away layers of sediment covering one corner of the container. Rust flaked away beneath the pressure, exposing faded shipping numbers that had been deliberately ground almost completely smooth years earlier. Whoever had hidden it had also tried to erase its identity. Samuel frowned. "I've recovered enough wrecks to know the difference between age and intention." "This was intentional," Ethan replied. After several minutes of careful work, the manipulator arm reached the damaged locking mechanism. Surprisingly, one side of the container door no longer sealed completely. The explosion that destroyed the fishing vessel had apparently shifted the frame just enough to leave a narrow opening. "Can you get a camera inside?" Briggs asked. Samuel nodded. "I can try." The small inspection camera detached from the main vehicle and slipped carefully through the opening. For a moment, the screen showed only darkness. Then, the interior lights activated. Rows of waterproof storage cases appeared first, strapped securely to reinforced shelving that had somehow remained intact despite years beneath the ocean. Several cases had broken loose and floated slightly above the floor before settling again. Bright orange corrosion-resistant seals still surrounded most of them. Ethan leaned closer. "Open the nearest one." Samuel manipulated the robotic arm until it released the damaged latch. The lid slowly lifted. Inside lay tightly bundled stacks of U.S. $100 bills, each vacuum-sealed inside transparent waterproof packaging. Even through the camera feed, the quantity was astonishing. Samuel let out a low whistle. "That's enough cash to buy a fleet of fishing boats." Briggs' expression remained unchanged. Money explains nothing by itself. The camera moved to the second case. Inside rested several ruggedized hard drives housed within military-grade waterproof shells. Their metal casings bore no manufacturer logos, only serial numbers etched by laser. Olivia Bennett's earlier warning echoed inside Ethan's mind. Someone had invested extraordinary effort protecting information. The third case contained neatly organized binders, sealed inside moisture-resistant envelopes. Samuel carefully adjusted the camera for a better view while Briggs enlarged the image on the monitor. Shipping manifests. Cargo schedules, coordinates, lists of vessel names. Every page appeared professionally prepared. None of them mentioned ordinary commercial freight. Instead, shipment after shipment consisted of coded designations and destination coordinates scattered across several continents. Briggs photographed every visible page. "This isn't smuggling between fishermen." "No," Ethan answered. "It's organized." The deeper the camera traveled into the container, the more deliberate everything appeared. Nothing had been abandoned in panic. Every object had been cataloged, packed, and preserved with the expectation that someone would eventually return to retrieve it. Samuel began withdrawing the inspection camera. "We've seen enough." "Not yet," Ethan replied. Something continued bothering him. If this container explained why the boat had been destroyed, then why had the mysterious woman entrusted him with the backpack instead of directing him here? The answer had to be nearby. Rex suddenly stood again. The German Shepherd moved toward the opposite side of the deck, nose lowered, quietly sniffing the salt air despite the ocean surrounding them. His behavior immediately caught Ethan's attention. Throughout their years together, Rex had repeatedly demonstrated an uncanny ability to connect faint sensory clues with hidden dangers. "What is it?" Ethan asked softly. Rex stopped. He stared toward another section of the monitor, where scattered pieces of the Margaret Ann rested upside down. Samuel noticed. "The dog wants us back near the wreck." Without hesitation, he redirected the underwater vehicle. The camera glided beneath the collapsed stern, where broken beams created a narrow cavity beneath the remains of the deck. Loose fishing nets drifted gently with the current, partially hiding the space. "Increase the lights," Briggs instructed. The floodlights brightened. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Then a faint metallic reflection flashed beneath a collapsed floor panel. Samuel carefully maneuvered the robotic arm between twisted timbers. It required several attempts before the manipulator finally grasped the small object wedged inside the wreckage. When it emerged into the light, everyone recognized it immediately. It was no larger than a matchbox, completely sealed. Constructed from dark composite material instead of ordinary plastic, waterproof. One side carried a tiny recessed connector unlike any commercial memory device Ethan had ever seen. Olivia Bennett's earlier assessment returned instantly to Briggs' mind. The encrypted backpack still lacked one critical component, preventing full access to its protected data. Ethan stared at the recovered object. "That's why she gave me the backpack." Briggs nodded slowly. "And this?" He looked from the tiny waterproof chip to the secure container still hidden beneath the Atlantic. Maybe the only key capable of unlocking everything inside it. No one aboard the salvage vessel realized that the discovery they had just made would soon transform them from investigators into targets. The return trip from the wreck site felt longer than the journey out, not because the sea had changed, but because every person aboard the salvage vessel understood they were no longer investigating an old maritime disaster. They were carrying evidence that someone had been willing to bury beneath the Atlantic for years, and Ethan could not shake the feeling that the ocean itself had been safer than whatever awaited them on land. The waterproof chip remained locked inside a hardened military evidence case beside the mysterious backpack. Commander Nathan Briggs insisted the two items never be separated, even during transport. Captain Samuel O'Connor steered the vessel through a veil of afternoon fog, without asking further questions. Years of recovering lost ships had taught him when silence protected lives better than curiosity. Rex never settled. The aging German Shepherd remained near the cabin door instead of lying at Ethan's feet, as he normally would after a long day. His ears twitched toward distant engines that human hearing could barely distinguish. Several times he walked to the stern, sniffed the wind, and quietly returned without barking. Ethan noticed every movement. "You've felt it too," Ethan murmured. The dog lifted his head. Not fear. Expectation. Work. Day. 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 By the time they reached the naval pier, Briggs had already arranged discreet transportation back to the medical facility, rather than the main base headquarters. He no longer trusted official channels completely. Too many people had learned about Ethan too quickly, and the attempted surveillance inside the hospital had proven one uncomfortable truth. Whoever wanted the backpack possessed both resources and patience. The convoy consisted of only two unmarked government SUVs. Briggs drove the lead vehicle himself. Ethan sat beside him while Rex occupied the rear seat, watching through the back window with unwavering concentration. The second vehicle carried the recovered evidence under armed escort. For nearly 20 minutes, the drive remained uneventful. Then, Rex stood. His posture changed so abruptly that Ethan instinctively turned around. "What is it? What is it? What is it?" The German Shepherd stared through the rear glass toward a dark gray pickup, maintaining a constant distance, several hundred yards behind them. The truck never attempted to overtake them. It never fell farther back. It simply remained there, matching every turn. Briggs checked the mirror. "I've noticed him too. You think we're being followed? I think someone wants us to think they're not." Instead of driving directly toward the hospital, Briggs deliberately exited the highway onto a coastal service road, used mostly by local fishermen. The pickup followed. He turned again. So did the truck. Confirmation required no further discussion. Briggs reached for the encrypted radio. "Convoy 2, maintain distance. Possible surveillance." The reply arrived immediately. "Copy." Ethan glanced toward Rex. The old dog had not stopped watching the vehicle. Military instincts rarely disappeared completely. In Rex, they had merely grown quieter with age. The convoy finally entered the secured perimeter of the Naval Medical Center. Military police verified identification before allowing both SUVs through the gate. Only then did the gray pickup continue past the entrance without slowing. Briggs memorized the license plate. "It won't be real," he said. "I know. But someone wanted us to see it." That realization unsettled Ethan more than the pursuit itself. Professional surveillance teams usually preferred remaining invisible. These people wanted him to understand that they knew where he was. Inside the hospital, security procedures tightened immediately. Access to Ethan's floor now required biometric authorization, and additional Navy personnel quietly replaced ordinary hospital guards. Emily Carter noticed the change before anyone explained it. "I've never seen this many armed officers around a single patient," she admitted while changing Ethan's dressings. "You probably don't want to know why," Ethan answered with a tired smile. Emily looked at him for a moment. "I don't need to know why." She secured the fresh bandage around his shoulder. "I just need you alive when this is over." Her words carried simple honesty rather than drama, and Ethan appreciated that more than she realized. Late that evening, Briggs gathered only a handful of trusted personnel inside a secure conference room. Maps, photographs, and recovered documents covered the large table. The shipping manifests from the underwater container suggested a network far larger than simple smuggling, yet no company names appeared. No governments, only coded routes, dates, and unexplained transfers. Olivia Bennett examined one page through a magnifier. "These shipment intervals are too regular. That is the biggest." Briggs nodded. They weren't moving random cargo. They were operating a system. Before anyone could continue, an encrypted message arrived on Briggs's secure terminal. He opened it. His expression slowly hardened. "What happened?" Ethan asked. Briggs rotated the monitor. Every attempt to identify the shipping records through federal intelligence databases had failed, not because the records did not exist, because someone with extremely high clearance had erased every corresponding archive less than 6 hours earlier. "They're cleaning up," Briggs said quietly. "They know we've started looking." No one inside the room spoke. For the first time since the explosion, Ethan felt the invisible shape of the enemy surrounding them. Not a single criminal, not a small group. An organization, one capable of reaching into protected government systems without leaving obvious traces. Briggs finally broke the silence. "Until now, we've been investigating evidence." He looked around the room. "From this moment forward," his voice became noticeably lower, "assume we're the targets. Bye." The warning proved prophetic sooner than anyone expected. The following morning, an official police cruiser stopped outside the hospital entrance. 2 uniformed officers entered through the main lobby, carrying legitimate paperwork, requesting temporary custody of Ethan Walker for additional questioning related to the maritime explosion. Their uniforms appeared immaculate. Their badges reflected genuine craftsmanship. Even their patrol vehicle displayed authentic department markings. The request reached Briggs within minutes. He walked toward the security desk without hurry. Something about the timing bothered him. Before he reached the lobby, Rex had already arrived beside Ethan's wheelchair. The German Shepherd looked directly through the glass entrance doors. His nose lifted slightly. His muscles stiffened. A low growl rolled deep inside his chest. Ethan looked toward the officers. "They're police." Rex growled louder. Not once since leaving military service had Ethan known the dog to react that way toward legitimate law enforcement. Briggs stopped walking. He watched Rex instead of the officers. Years spent around military working dogs had taught him a lesson many people ignored. A trained dog could not read a badge, but it could read a human being, and Rex had just made his judgment. Commander Nathan Briggs did not move immediately. Instead of questioning the German Shepherd, he questioned the situation. During decades spent inside naval intelligence, he had learned that facts often arrived long before proof. Rex had already demonstrated his reliability more than once, first by refusing to surrender the backpack, then by exposing the disguised maintenance worker inside the hospital. Briggs had stopped viewing the aging military dog as merely Ethan's companion. He had become another witness, one whose instincts had not yet been wrong. The two uniformed officers waited patiently beyond the security checkpoint, neither appearing nervous nor impatient. The older of the pair introduced himself as Sergeant Paul Hendricks, a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with closely cropped blonde hair, a neatly trimmed mustache, and the confident posture of someone accustomed to command. His younger partner, Officer Kevin Ross, looked to be in his early 30s, tall and athletic with short dark hair and alert hazel eyes. Both spoke politely to hospital staff, never raising their voices or attempting to force entry. Everything about them looked professional, perhaps too professional. Briggs requested their paperwork. The documents appeared authentic, carrying official seals, signatures, and case references connected to the maritime explosion. Even the digital verification code initially passed inspection. Emily Carter quietly wheeled Ethan into an observation room overlooking the lobby while remaining out of sight. Rex positioned himself beside the wheelchair, never taking his eyes off the visitors below. His ears remained rigid, and the low rumble in his chest never disappeared. "They don't smell right," Ethan whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Briggs glanced sideways. "You trust that? I trusted it overseas." And? It kept people alive. Without confronting the officers, Briggs contacted the regional police dispatcher through an encrypted military channel unavailable to ordinary civilian agencies. Less than 2 minutes later, the answer returned. No officers named Paul Hendricks or Kevin Ross had been assigned to the case. No request for Ethan Walker existed. No patrol car matching the registration parked outside had been dispatched that morning. Briggs quietly folded the paperwork. "Seal every exit," he instructed the security team through his earpiece. "Do not alarm them." The atmosphere changed instantly. Uniformed Navy security officers casually repositioned themselves throughout the lobby without drawing attention. Elevators were temporarily locked. Exterior doors switched to controlled access. Hospital visitors noticed nothing unusual, believing the additional personnel part of ordinary military procedure. The disguised officers sensed the change almost immediately. Sergeant Hendricks smiled politely. "There seems to be some confusion." "I'm afraid there is," Briggs replied evenly. "We can wait. I don't think you should." The older man's pleasant expression faded almost imperceptibly. For a brief second, his eyes hardened with the cold calculation Ethan had seen in professional operators years earlier. It vanished so quickly that most people would never have noticed. Rex did. The German Shepherd barked sharply. The sound echoed through the lobby. At that exact moment, the younger officer shoved the security gate sideways and sprinted toward the main entrance. His partner moved just as quickly in the opposite direction, abandoning every attempt to maintain the appearance of legitimate law enforcement. "They're running!" one sailor shouted. The chase lasted less than a minute. Outside, the fake patrol cruiser accelerated away before Navy vehicles could block the driveway. Although the suspects escaped, they left behind something far more valuable than their counterfeit badges. Inside the abandoned police vehicle, investigators recovered multiple forged identification cards representing several federal and state agencies, spare police uniforms, emergency medical jackets, and tactical communication equipment, with every manufacturer marking carefully removed. Olivia Bennett examined the recovered electronics later that afternoon. These weren't assembled by amateurs. Briggs agreed. No, they prepared for several identities. They expected to need them. The discovery forced everyone to reconsider every unexpected encounter since the explosion. The maintenance worker, the false federal agents, now counterfeit police officers. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. Someone possessed the resources to impersonate virtually anyone capable of reaching Ethan. That evening, another development deepened the growing sense of danger. A helicopter requested emergency landing clearance on the hospital roof, identifying itself as an air ambulance, transferring a critically injured patient from a remote fishing community. Weather conditions had deteriorated rapidly along the coastline, making military medical facilities the closest option. Everything appeared routine, until Rex reacted. He had been sleeping lightly beside Ethan's bed when the distant sound of rotor blades reached the building. Within seconds, he stood. Not excited, not frightened, alert. He walked to the window overlooking the rooftop helipad and stared upward, His ears flattened. A low growl returned. Briggs immediately received the warning through Ethan. The helicopter. What about it? Rex. Briggs needed nothing more. He contacted air traffic control. Military operators verified the aircraft's identification code. It belonged to a medical helicopter. Yet, one detail failed to match. The flight plan had never included the Naval Medical Center. The aircraft had changed destination only minutes earlier. "Hold the landing," Briggs ordered. Tower personnel transmitted the instruction. The helicopter hesitated above the coastline for several moments, before abruptly turning away without requesting clarification or declaring an emergency. Real medical crews argued. They did not leave. Briggs watched the aircraft disappear toward the horizon. They weren't bringing a patient. "No," Ethan answered. "They were bringing people." Night settled heavily across the hospital. Additional Marines quietly reinforced every entrance, while intelligence officers transported both the backpack and the waterproof chip into a newly established secure vault beneath the facility. Only Ethan, Briggs, Olivia, and 2 cleared technicians retained access. Shortly before midnight, Briggs assembled the small team one final time. He placed photographs across the conference table. The fake federal agents, the disguised maintenance worker, the counterfeit police officers, the suspicious helicopter. Every image represented a different disguise, a different identity, a different profession, yet all pursued exactly the same objective. Briggs looked at Ethan. "This isn't coincidence anymore." Ethan slowly nodded. "They'll keep changing faces. They won't stop." Briggs rested one hand on the sealed evidence case containing the backpack. "Whoever they are." He paused before speaking the words that finally gave shape to the invisible enemy surrounding them. "Our intelligence division has been comparing fragments recovered from the container with several dormant investigations." He slid a classified file across the table. A single name appeared on the cover. Black. Tide. Almost nothing else followed. No headquarters. No leadership. No official membership list. Only one assessment, written by an analyst, years earlier. A decentralized covert organization specializing in weapons trafficking, military intelligence theft, infiltration through impersonation, and targeted elimination of witnesses. The room fell silent. Doubly. Ethan lowered his eyes toward Rex, who rested quietly beside his chair. For the first time since the explosion, the enemy had a name. And according to everything Briggs now believed, Black Tide had already begun hunting both of them. The discovery of Black Tide changed more than the investigation. It changed the way Ethan Walker looked at every face around him. The hospital that had once represented safety now felt like another temporary shelter waiting to be compromised. Every uniform had to be questioned. Every unexpected visitor deserved suspicion. Even the quiet moments between medical examinations carried an invisible tension because Ethan understood something he had spent years trying to forget. Once a covert organization decided someone had become a liability, patience often became its most dangerous weapon. Commander Nathan Briggs reached the same conclusion. 48 hours after identifying Black Tide, he quietly arranged Ethan's discharge from the Naval Medical Center under sealed military orders. The paperwork listed the transfer as routine rehabilitation, but the convoy left before sunrise with no public notification, no predictable route, and no electronic communication beyond encrypted military frequencies. The waterproof backpack and the recovered chip traveled separately inside hardened security cases, each accompanied by armed personnel who had been personally vetted by Briggs. Even Rex sensed the difference. The old German shepherd no longer watched passing strangers with ordinary caution. Instead, he observed them with the silent discipline that had defined his years as a military working dog. His amber eyes lingered on reflections in vehicle windows, parked cars along empty roads, and anyone who appeared to notice the convoy for more than a passing moment. Age had slowed his body, but not the instincts that had once kept an entire SEAL team alive. After nearly 3 hours, the vehicles left the highway and entered a heavily forested military reservation, hidden among the mountains of western Maine. No signs marked the entrance. Layers of fencing disappeared between dense pine trees, while discreet surveillance towers overlooked every approach. It was less a base than a forgotten training facility, one abandoned by public attention but not by the government. Briggs finally broke the silence. "There's someone you need to meet." Ethan turned toward him. "You trust him?" "I've trusted him with my life." That answer required no further explanation. The convoy stopped outside a modest log building overlooking a frozen lake. Unlike the modern military installations Ethan remembered, this place carried the quiet simplicity of an old ranger station. Firewood rested neatly beside the porch. A weathered American flag moved gently in the cold breeze. No guards stood outside, yet Ethan immediately recognized hidden security measures woven naturally into the landscape. Cameras disappeared among pine branches. Motion sensors blended into stone walls. Whoever lived here preferred invisibility over intimidation. The front door opened before anyone knocked. Colonel Michael Donovan stepped onto the porch. He was 67 years old, taller than Ethan by nearly 2 inches, with broad shoulders that age had failed to diminish. Thick silver hair framed a deeply lined face, while a closely trimmed white beard softened features that otherwise remained remarkably sharp. His steel blue eyes carried neither warmth nor coldness at first glance. They carried memory. Decades of command had taught him to study people before speaking, and years of classified operations had left him with the habit of noticing exits before greetings. A faded scar crossed the back of his right hand, the result of an operation in the Balkans nearly 30 years earlier, an operation Ethan remembered only because Donovan had personally carried 2 wounded soldiers to extraction after refusing evacuation himself. He had retired officially 8 years earlier. Ethan never expected to see him again. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Donovan smiled faintly. "You look terrible." Ethan laughed for the first time in days. "I was going to say the same thing." The older officer stepped forward and embraced him briefly. "Good to see you're still difficult to kill." Inside, the cabin felt unexpectedly ordinary. Bookshelves lined one wall beside framed military photographs turned face down, as though their owner had chosen memory without nostalgia. A wood stove warmed the room, filling it with the scent of cedar. Rex entered cautiously before relaxing almost immediately. Donovan knelt despite the stiffness in his knees. "So you remember me?" Rex walked forward without hesitation. The old German shepherd rested his head beneath Donovan's hand. Ethan watched quietly. "You two worked together?" "For a while," Donovan replied, "before he became your partner." The answer surprised Ethan. Donovan gently scratched behind Rex's ears. "He was barely 2 years old when I first met him. Smart, stubborn. Didn't trust anyone until they earned it. He hasn't changed." "No," Donovan smiled. "Neither have you." After lunch, Briggs secured the cabin while Donovan led Ethan into a smaller office overlooking the lake. Maps covered one wall, but none displayed ordinary roads or tourist landmarks. Instead, they showed shipping lanes, satellite imagery, and maritime routes stretching across the Atlantic. Several locations had been marked decades earlier. Donovan closed the door. "What I'm about to tell you has never appeared in any official report." Ethan sat silently. "You already know the name Black Tide. I know they wanted the backpack. They wanted much more than that." Donovan walked toward one of the maps. 23 years ago, intelligence analysts began noticing military technology disappearing without battles, without theft reports, and without public investigations. Weapons prototypes vanished before entering service. Classified communication systems appeared on foreign markets. Entire databases were copied without triggering security alarms. No one knew who was responsible? We knew something existed. He paused. We just couldn't prove it. Donovan pointed toward shipping routes crossing the North Atlantic. Black Tide never operated like an ordinary criminal organization. They never controlled cities. They controlled information, cargo, access. They bribed officials when necessary, threatened witnesses when required, and erased people who became dangerous. Ethan listened without interrupting. Every sentence explained another piece of the puzzle discovered beneath the sea. The container, we found. Donovan nodded. Was almost certainly one of many. You've seen this before. I've suspected it. The older officer leaned against the desk. But suspicion isn't evidence. He looked directly into Ethan's eyes. The backpack may be the first piece of evidence capable of surviving long enough to expose the entire network. Silence settled over the room. Outside the office window, Rex lay quietly on the porch, facing the tree line instead of sleeping. Even here, far from cities and hospitals, he continued watching. Donovan noticed. He still thinks someone's coming. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. So do I. The colonel slowly opened a locked drawer. From inside, he removed a thin classified folder whose edges had yellowed with age. He placed it on the desk between them. The woman who gave you that backpack. He rested one hand on the file. Wasn't who you believed she was. Colonel Michael Donovan rested his hand on the worn classified folder for several long seconds before opening it. The silence inside the cabin became almost tangible. Outside, the winter wind moved gently through the pine trees, while Rex remained on the porch, watching the forest with the quiet patience of a sentry who had never truly left active duty. Ethan found himself staring at the faded cover rather than the man across from him. Experience had taught him that some files changed missions, others changed lives. Donovan finally opened the folder. Inside lay a single photograph. The woman standing in the picture looked remarkably different from the exhausted stranger Ethan had pulled aboard the Margaret Ann. Her dark hair had been neatly tied behind her head, and she wore a plain gray blazer instead of soaked tactical clothing. Without blood on her forehead or desperation in her eyes, she appeared almost ordinary. She could have passed unnoticed in any airport or government office. Only her steady green eyes remained unmistakable. "My God," Ethan whispered. "You remember her." "I remember those eyes." Donovan nodded. Her name was Claire Morgan. The name meant nothing to Ethan. Officially, Donovan continued, Claire Morgan never existed. It was one of several identities she used over nearly 12 years. Briggs quietly entered the office and closed the door behind him. He already knew portions of the story, but Donovan had insisted Ethan hear the entire truth only after recovering enough to understand its weight. Claire began as an intelligence officer, attached to a multinational counterproliferation task force, Donovan explained. She was exceptionally intelligent, fluent in 4 languages, and unusually gifted at earning trust. Those abilities made her ideal for long-term infiltration assignments. He paused before continuing. Eventually, she disappeared. You mean she was captured? No. Donovan slowly shook his head. She volunteered to disappear. The colonel walked toward the window, overlooking the frozen lake. Black Tide never recruited ordinary criminals. They recruited logistics experts, intelligence officers, corrupt officials, cyber specialists, former military contractors, people who understood how governments protected secrets. Claire entered that world pretending to betray her own country. Ethan remained silent. Only 5 people knew the truth. And you were one of them. I authorized the operation. The admission seemed heavier than Donovan had expected. His normally composed voice carried unmistakable regret. We believed she could stay inside Black Tide for 18 months. How long did she remain? Almost 9 years. Ethan slowly lowered his eyes. 9 years. Long enough to lose friends. Long enough to abandon every familiar identity. Long enough for the outside world to assume she had become exactly what she pretended to be. Did anyone try bringing her home? Ethan asked. Several times. And each time, she refused. Donovan picked up another photograph from the file. This one showed only a harbor crowded with shipping containers. Every year she moved closer to the people controlling Black Tide. Every year she sent fragments of information. Never enough to destroy them. Only enough to prove they existed. Briggs quietly added, the organization compartmentalized everything. Members rarely understood the entire network. So, she kept digging. Yes, Donovan carefully returned the photograph to the folder. The deeper she went, the fewer people she could trust. Eventually, she stopped communicating altogether. Donovan. For how long? Almost 2 years. Ethan frowned. So everyone thought she'd turned. Some did. But not you. Donovan looked directly at him. I knew Claire. There was no hesitation in his voice. She understood exactly what betrayal looked like. She also understood the difference between pretending and becoming. The colonel opened the final section of the file. Inside rested several handwritten pages, protected inside transparent archival sleeves. The handwriting remained neat, despite obvious haste. These arrived 3 weeks before your boat exploded. Ethan leaned closer. They're hers? Yes. Donovan carefully unfolded one page. The letter contained no operational details, only one short statement written near the bottom. If anything happens to me, the archive must survive. The archive matters more than I do. Ethan felt the memory return with painful clarity. No matter what happens, don't let anyone open this until you know who you can trust. She had spoken almost the same words aboard the Margaret Ann. Donovan quietly continued. Claire eventually discovered something Black Tide never intended anyone to find. The archive? The complete operational archive. He looked toward the sealed evidence case resting on the nearby table. The backpack. Briggs stepped forward. The hard drives inside the underwater container? Supporting evidence. The shipping manifests? Supporting evidence. The money? Operating funds. Donovan rested one hand on the evidence case. But the backpack. He allowed the sentence to linger. Contains the structure, holding everything together. Ethan understood immediately. Names. Accounts. Yes? Operations. Everyone she could collect. The room fell quiet once more. Years of military experience allowed Ethan to appreciate what that meant. Criminal organizations survived because evidence remained scattered. If everything truly existed in one protected archive, then Black Tide's greatest strength had become its greatest vulnerability. Briggs spoke softly. So Claire chose him. Donovan nodded. She knew she was being hunted. She also knew she needed someone outside every intelligence database, someone trained enough to protect the archive, but invisible enough that Black Tide wouldn't expect him. Ethan gave a bitter smile. I wasn't invisible for very long. No, Donovan's expression hardened, because someone witnessed the transfer. He reached into the folder one final time and removed a technical diagram. Unlike the previous documents, this one showed the internal architecture of the backpack's security system. Olivia Bennett had already examined similar hardware, but Donovan's copy included annotations written by Claire herself. 3 concentric encryption layers, a biometric verification sequence, a cryptographic authentication chain, and one final instruction highlighted in red, single authorized activation. Donovan pointed toward it. Claire anticipated capture. So she built a safeguard. She modified the system herself. Briggs studied the diagram. If someone guesses incorrectly, Donovan answered without emotion. The archive erases itself. Completely? Every file. Easily recoverable? No. The colonel slowly folded the diagram. The storage medium physically destroys its own encryption keys. Even the most advanced forensic laboratories wouldn't reconstruct the data afterward. Ethan looked toward the sealed backpack. The weight of responsibility settled over him more heavily than any combat mission he had ever accepted. So if we make one mistake... Donovan finished the sentence. Black Tide survives. What? The old colonel met Ethan's eyes with complete certainty. There will only be one opportunity to open that backpack, and it has to be done with the correct key. He glanced toward the waterproof chip recovered from beneath the wreck of the Margaret Ann. Otherwise, No one inside the room needed him to finish the thought. Every sacrifice Claire Morgan had made across 9 years, every document hidden beneath the Atlantic, every name inside the archive, every chance to destroy Black Tide forever would vanish in a single irreversible moment. The morning they left Colonel Michael Donovan's cabin, the sky over coastal Maine carried the same iron-gray color Ethan remembered from the day the Margaret Ann disappeared beneath the Atlantic. The resemblance unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Storms had always been part of life along the coast, but after the explosion, he no longer regarded bad weather as an inconvenience. It had become a reminder that nature often concealed the choices people made in darkness. Inside the reinforced military transport, the waterproof backpack rested inside a hardened containment case, bolted securely to the floor. The recovered waterproof chip traveled separately in Commander Nathan Briggs' possession, exactly as Colonel Donovan had ordered. No radio transmissions identified their destination. Every route had been changed twice before departure, and even the drivers received navigation instructions only minutes before each turn. Despite those precautions, no one inside the vehicle believed they had disappeared. Black Tide had already proven otherwise. Ethan sat opposite Briggs while Rex rested between them. The old German shepherd no longer showed the impatience of youth. Instead, he conserved his strength with the discipline that came only from experience. His muzzle had grown noticeably wider over the years, and the scars beneath his coat remained hidden beneath thick fur. Yet his amber eyes missed almost nothing. Every vibration beneath the tires, every unfamiliar engine outside, every pause in the convoy caused his ears to shift with quiet precision. "He hasn't relaxed once," Briggs observed. "He won't," Ethan answered. "Not until this ends." "And when will that be?" Ethan looked toward the sealed evidence case. "When the backpack is finally opened." 1. The convoy eventually abandoned paved roads altogether, climbing through narrow forest tracks that wound toward Maine's rugged coastline. Dense spruce trees blocked most satellite visibility, while jagged cliffs gradually emerged through drifting sea mist. After another hour, the lead vehicle stopped beside what appeared to be an abandoned Coast Guard maintenance station, overlooking the Atlantic. Only after multiple security checkpoints did Ethan understand the true destination. Far beyond the cliffs stood an old granite lighthouse, rising above crashing waves. Time had stripped much of its white paint away, leaving weathered stone exposed beneath decades of wind and salt. Its beacon no longer served commercial shipping, yet military engineers had quietly restored the interior years earlier. Hidden communications equipment occupied the lower levels, while the lantern room above contained one of the few isolated military encryption terminals capable of handling the security architecture Claire Morgan had designed. Colonel Donovan had been right. There was only one place left where the archive could safely be opened. Briggs looked toward the lighthouse. "Every signal leaving that building is routed through secure naval satellites. So even if Black Tide intercepts us, they'll be too late." The team approached cautiously. The entrance appeared abandoned, its iron door stained by rust and battered by countless winters. Inside, however, reinforced wiring disappeared through thick stone walls, while emergency generators hummed quietly beneath the structure. Every modernization had been carefully concealed beneath the building's historic appearance. Waiting inside was another member of Donovan's trusted network. Dr. Eleanor Hayes greeted them with a calm smile that contrasted sharply with the tension surrounding the mission. 61 years old, Eleanor possessed shoulder-length silver hair gathered neatly behind her neck and thoughtful blue eyes that reflected decades spent solving impossible technical problems. She stood slightly shorter than Ethan, her posture relaxed despite long hours of work. Years earlier, she had helped design secure naval communication systems before retiring into classified consulting work. Colleagues respected her because she remained patient under pressure and never allowed urgency to replace precision. "I wish we were meeting under happier circumstances," she said warmly while shaking Ethan's hand. "So do I." She crouched briefly beside Rex. "And you must be the famous partner I've heard so much about." Rex accepted the greeting with a gentle sniff before returning his attention to the doorway. Eleanor noticed. "He doesn't trust the silence." "He trusts very little these days," Ethan replied. The group descended into the lighthouse's secure operations room, where Eleanor began preparing the specialized interface required to connect the recovered waterproof chip with the backpack. Every cable underwent triple inspection. Backup power systems activated automatically. Secure satellite links. Established encrypted contact with Naval Intelligence Command, without transmitting any classified data. Nothing would actually be open today. Preparation came first. One mistake remained unacceptable. While Eleanor worked, Briggs spread updated intelligence reports across a large wooden table. Down, down, down. Our surveillance teams have confirmed unusual activity along the coastline during the last 24 hours. F. Ethan studied the photographs. Several fishing boats, a civilian helicopter, 2 maintenance trucks, an emergency utility van. Individually, none appeared suspicious. Together, their movements formed an increasingly tight circle around the lighthouse. "They're searching," Ethan said. "They know we're somewhere nearby." Briggs nodded. "They just don't know exactly where." Outside, the weather deteriorated rapidly. Wind drove heavy rain against the lighthouse windows, while Atlantic waves exploded against the cliffs below with increasing violence. The building itself had survived more than a century of storms, yet the sound reminded everyone inside how isolated they had become. Rex suddenly lifted his head. His ears rotated toward the entrance staircase. Everyone fell silent. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still for several seconds before walking slowly toward the narrow window overlooking the access road. He did not bark. He simply watched. Ethan joined him. Far below, barely visible through sheets of rain, headlights briefly appeared between the trees before disappearing again. One vehicle, then another. Neither continued toward the lighthouse. Instead, both stopped beyond visual range. Briggs quietly lowered the binoculars after confirming the movement. "They found the mountain road. Military? No. Civilians? I don't believe so." No one needed to say the name aloud. The realization hung over the room without words. Black tide had reached the perimeter. They had not attacked. Not yet. But they were close enough that even the old lighthouse seemed to hold its breath while waiting for the first move. Chapter 7. The Final Battle at the Lighthouse. Rain lashed against the granite walls with growing violence, and the old lighthouse groaned beneath the force of the Atlantic storm. Inside the operations room, every light remained steady despite the weather outside, powered by redundant military generators hidden beneath the stone foundation. Dr. Eleanor Hayes completed her final system checks, without allowing the storm, or the silence, to rush her work. Years spent protecting classified communication systems had taught her that precision mattered most when time appeared to be running out. Commander Nathan Briggs monitored the security cameras positioned along the winding access road. One by one, the camera feeds began disappearing, not with the static of storm damage, but with the abrupt, orderly blackouts of deliberate interference. "They're taking out the cameras," Briggs said quietly. Ethan stepped beside him. "How many?" "4. Weather?" Briggs slowly shook his head. "No." There was no panic inside the room. Everyone had expected black tide to arrive eventually. The only surprise was how quickly they had located the lighthouse. Rex stood before anyone else reacted. The old German Shepherd walked toward the heavy entrance door, stopping several feet away. His body remained perfectly still, but every muscle beneath his thick coat tightened. Ethan recognized the posture immediately. Rex was not preparing to attack. He was listening. Faint footsteps echoed somewhere outside the lower entrance. Not one person. Several. "They're here," Ethan whispered. Briggs immediately activated the internal security locks. Thick steel bolts slid silently into place behind the reinforced lighthouse door. The building had originally been designed to withstand Atlantic hurricanes, and later military engineers had transformed it into a hardened communications site. It would not fall easily. The first impact struck seconds later. A heavy metal battering ram slammed against the outer door. The granite tower trembled. Another impact followed, then another. "They're trying to force entry," Eleanor said. "No," Ethan answered. "They're testing us." The pounding suddenly stopped. Silence returned. That silence proved far more unsettling than the attack. Briggs studied the security monitors. Several shadowy figures moved through the rain wearing different clothing. One appeared dressed as a county deputy. Another wore emergency rescue gear. A third carried equipment resembling that of a utility repair crew. "They're changing appearances even now," Briggs observed. "They never want witnesses remembering the same faces." Outside, a loudspeaker crackled to life. "This is emergency management. Severe structural damage has been reported. We are evacuating the lighthouse." Ethan almost smiled. "The county doesn't use that frequency." "No," Briggs replied. "They're improvising." No one inside answered the broadcast. Minutes passed. Then, the emergency lights flickered once, twice. The main power remained active, but the external electrical systems had been cut. "They've isolated the building," Eleanor reported while continuing her work. "The secure terminal is ready." On the reinforced steel table rested the waterproof backpack beside the recovered waterproof chip. Eleanor carefully inserted the chip into the specially designed interface Claire Morgan had anticipated years earlier. Multiple encrypted prompts appeared across the monitor: biometric verification, cryptographic synchronization, archive, integrity, confirmed. For the first time since the backpack had entered Ethan's life, the system accepted a valid authentication sequence. "It worked," Eleanor whispered. The final prompt appeared. "Transmit archive?" Briggs looked toward Ethan. "This is your decision." Ethan stared at the screen. Claire Morgan had spent nearly a decade sacrificing her own identity to gather this evidence. Rex had nearly died, protecting the backpack across 2 days in the Atlantic. Countless others whose names remained hidden inside the archive had unknowingly depended on this moment. He placed one hand gently on Rex's neck. The old German shepherd looked back at him with complete trust. Ethan pressed the confirmation key. Encrypted files flooded the secure terminal. Satellite antennas hidden inside the lighthouse automatically aligned with a classified naval relay orbiting high above the Atlantic. Layer after layer of protected data streamed upward through channels black tide could neither intercept nor alter. Outside, the attackers understood something had changed. Gunfire shattered the windows of the lower level. The reinforced glass cracked, but held. Another explosion rocked the entrance. Dust drifted from the ancient ceiling stones. "They know we're transmitting," Briggs said. "They're out of time." The upload indicator climbed steadily. 23%, 41, 68. The pounding at the entrance became frantic. Metal screamed beneath repeated impacts. Rex suddenly sprinted toward the staircase. Ethan followed immediately. Halfway down the narrow stone stairs, they found the source. One of the interior service doors had begun bending inward after an explosive charge destroyed its locking frame. Through the narrow opening, a gloved hand reached inside, attempting to release the secondary lock. Without hesitation, Rex lunged. His powerful jaws clamped onto the intruder's forearm before the man could pull free. A cry of pain echoed through the storm as the attacker stumbled backward. Ethan seized the opportunity, slamming the damaged door shut, while Briggs engaged the emergency steel barrier behind it. The impact locked the entrance permanently. Rex stepped back, breathing heavily but still standing between Ethan and the shattered doorway. "You did it again," Ethan said quietly, resting one hand on the old dog's shoulder. They raced back upstairs. 92%, 96, 99. The final progress bar disappeared. A single message replaced it. Archive successfully transmitted. At almost the same instant, powerful helicopter rotors thundered across the storm. Searchlights pierced the rain. Dark figures descended on fast ropes from military helicopters surrounding the lighthouse. Commander Briggs looked through the shattered observation window and allowed himself the first genuine smile Ethan had seen since this mission began. They made it. Outside, members of a Navy SEAL assault team rapidly secured the perimeter, while black tide operatives abandoned their assault and scattered into the surrounding forest. Some were captured almost immediately. Others disappeared into the storm before they could be identified. Inside the lighthouse, Ethan slowly lowered himself into a chair, exhausted beyond words. The backpack rested quietly on the table, its purpose fulfilled. Rex lay beside Ethan's boots, equally exhausted, his breathing slow but peaceful. For the first time since the Margaret Ann exploded beneath the Atlantic, Ethan allowed himself to believe that Claire Morgan's sacrifice had not been in vain. The storm finally surrendered to the morning. Soft sunlight spread across the Atlantic, touching the old lighthouse with a warmth that had seemed impossible only hours earlier. Broken branches still lay scattered across the rocky cliffs, and pools of rainwater reflected a sky slowly returning to blue. For the first time in many days, the relentless sound of gunfire had been replaced by waves breaking peacefully against the shore. Inside the lighthouse, silence carried an entirely different meaning. The encrypted archive had completed its transmission before black tide reached the communications room. Within hours, intelligence agencies working through secure military channels began confirming what Claire Morgan had sacrificed nearly a decade to protect. Every document inside the archive matched evidence recovered from the underwater container. Shipping routes, financial transfers, covert identities, weapons transactions, and decades of classified theft now formed a single, undeniable picture. Commander Nathan Briggs stood beside a communications terminal, receiving one secure report after another. His normally composed face remained unreadable, but Ethan noticed something he had not seen before. Relief. Not celebration. Relief. Multiple arrests have already begun, Briggs said quietly without looking away from the monitor. Several international warrants were activated less than an hour ago. Financial accounts are being frozen faster than they can move the money. Ethan nodded slowly. So Claire finished the mission. Briggs finally looked at him. No. He paused before continuing. You did. Ethan did not answer. Instead, he looked toward the waterproof backpack resting on the wooden table. It appeared almost ordinary now. A simple black pack that had traveled across freezing seas, survived explosions, and carried the hopes of people whose names the world had never known. It no longer represented mystery. It represented sacrifice. Rex lay nearby, sleeping more deeply than he had since the Margaret Ann exploded. His breathing had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. A Navy veterinarian had cleaned the old scars reopened during the battle at the lighthouse, assuring Ethan that none of the injuries were life-threatening. Age had slowed the German Shepherd, but it had not diminished his courage. Ethan gently rested one hand on the dog's neck. You've earned your rest. Rex opened one eye briefly before closing it again. Several hours later, a military helicopter transported the small group back to the mainland. Unlike previous flights filled with uncertainty, this journey carried no urgent radio calls or evasive maneuvers. The danger had not disappeared completely, but its center had collapsed. Without the archive remaining hidden, black tide had lost the advantage secrecy had given them for more than 20 years. Colonel Michael Donovan waited for them at the secure airfield. The retired officer looked older than he had only days earlier, though perhaps it was simply the weight he had carried for so many years finally beginning to lift. He greeted Ethan with a firm handshake before quietly kneeling beside Rex. I owe you an apology, old friend, Donovan said softly, while stroking the German Shepherd's gray muzzle. Ethan raised an eyebrow. For what? The colonel smiled faintly. Years ago, I told your training officer that Rex was too stubborn to become an elite military dog. Ethan laughed. They proved you wrong. They certainly did. Donovan's smile faded into thoughtful silence. So did he. That afternoon, inside a secure conference room overlooking the harbor, senior officials reviewed the first verified results of the transmitted archive. Briggs summarized only the information Ethan needed to hear. Entire smuggling networks had been exposed. Corrupt procurement officers in multiple countries had already been detained. Hidden financial accounts linked to black tide were frozen. Several covert safe houses had been located through information Claire had hidden inside the archive. For every update, Ethan found himself thinking less about the organization and more about the woman whose name would never appear in public headlines. Will anyone know what she did? He finally asked. The room became quiet. Donovan answered first. Officially? Ethan understood before the answer came. No. The operation remains classified. Briggs spoke gently. But history and recognition are not always the same thing. Ethan looked through the conference room window toward the harbor below. Ships continued entering and leaving as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Families walked along the waterfront. Children laughed while feeding gulls. Life had already begun moving forward. Claire would never see it. Late that evening, after the final debriefing ended, Ethan walked alone toward the small military memorial overlooking the sea. Rex followed slowly beside him. The granite monument listed only names of service members officially recognized for extraordinary sacrifice. Claire's name was nowhere among them. Ethan stood silently for several minutes before placing a small white seashell at the base of the memorial. No speech, no salute, only gratitude. As he turned to leave, Donovan joined him without making a sound. You know they'll offer you your commission back. I know. What will you tell them? Ethan looked down at Rex. The old German shepherd had stopped beside a young family walking along the seawall. A little girl, perhaps 6 years old, smiled shyly before asking her parents for permission to pet him. Rex remained perfectly still, lowering his head gently so the child could reach behind his ears. For the first time since the mission began, Ethan saw something besides vigilance in his partner's eyes. Peace. He smiled, almost unconsciously. I think we've both served enough. Donovan followed Ethan's gaze toward the child, laughing beside the aging German shepherd. Then what comes next? Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched Rex patiently comforting someone who had no idea the old dog had helped save countless lives. Only then did Ethan realize that perhaps there was another kind of service still waiting for both of them. The weeks that followed passed more quietly than Ethan Walker had imagined possible. For years, his life had been measured by missions, deadlines, and danger. Even after leaving the Navy, peace had never truly arrived. It had simply changed its appearance. Now, for the first time in a very long while, every sunrise arrived without the expectation that someone might be waiting behind the next corner. Black tide collapsed faster than many intelligence officials believed possible. The archive Claire Morgan had protected for nearly a decade proved devastating. Every encrypted file complemented evidence recovered from the submerged container beneath the Atlantic. Financial records matched shipping manifests. Communications linked corrupt officials to covert arms transactions. Hidden identities unraveled under the weight of documented proof. Governments that had quietly suspected the organization's existence for years suddenly possessed evidence no courtroom could easily dismiss. Commander Nathan Briggs continued coordinating the investigation from Naval Intelligence Headquarters, though the exhaustion in his face gradually gave way to something resembling satisfaction. Colonel Michael Donovan, whose greatest burden had always been protecting secrets he could never explain, attended one final classified briefing before quietly retiring from government service for good. Neither man considered the victory perfect. Too many innocent people had suffered before justice finally arrived. Yet both understood that history rarely offered perfect endings. Sometimes it offered only the chance to prevent future tragedies. Several months later, Ethan received a formal invitation from Washington. A Navy staff car arrived at his small cabin overlooking the harbor, delivering a sealed envelope embossed with the Department of the Navy insignia. Inside rested an official letter inviting him to return to active service in an advisory role. His previous record had been fully restored. The recommendations praised his courage, professionalism, and decisive actions during the Black Tide operation. Everything he had once believed permanently lost had quietly been returned to him. He read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. Rex lay beside the fireplace, watching without curiosity. The old German shepherd no longer reacted to uniforms or official vehicles the way he once had. Years of service had taught him that duty came in many forms. His muzzle had turned almost completely silver now, and his pace had slowed noticeably, but his eyes remained gentle and alert whenever Ethan entered the room. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, with a faint smile. Rex answered by walking toward the open front door. Beyond the porch, The morning sun illuminated the empty piece of land beside the cabin. Ethan followed his gaze. For several minutes, he simply stood there, listening to gulls circling above the harbor and waves breaking softly against the rocks. His answer arrived without another thought. The following week, he respectfully declined the offer. Instead of returning to the battlefield, Ethan invested every dollar of the government reward, together with compensation awarded after the black tide investigation, into purchasing several acres of abandoned waterfront property on the island. The buildings standing there had once served as storage sheds for lobster fishermen before falling into disrepair. Most people saw collapsing roofs, broken fences, and weather-beaten docks. Ethan saw a possibility. Construction lasted nearly 6 months. Local fishermen volunteered equipment. Former Navy mechanics helped rebuild workshops. Veterinarians from the mainland donated medical supplies after learning about Ethan's plans. Vob, quote, Commander Briggs quietly arranged surplus training equipment, scheduled for disposal, while Donovan anonymously contributed enough funding to complete a modern veterinary clinic, without ever revealing his name. Slowly, the neglected property transformed. Large, grassy exercise fields replaced abandoned storage yards. Heated indoor kennels stood where rusted warehouses once leaned toward collapse. Walking trails wound through pine trees overlooking the sea, allowing aging dogs to move comfortably without difficult terrain. A modest memorial garden faced the Atlantic, dedicated not only to military working dogs but also to search and rescue animals, Police K9S, and every service animal whose loyalty had outlived public recognition. A wooden sign welcomed visitors. Harbor Light Working Dog Retirement and Training Center. Word spread surprisingly quickly. The first retired military dog arrived only 2 weeks after opening, then another. Soon, local police departments, Coast Guard stations, and volunteer rescue organizations began contacting Ethan whenever an aging service dog needed a peaceful place to spend retirement. Some arrived frightened after years of constant deployment. Others carried injuries that would never fully heal. Every one of them received patience before training, comfort before expectation. Rex became the heart of the center, without anyone officially appointing him. Young dogs instinctively followed him. Nervous animals relaxed after walking beside him. Children visiting with veteran families laughed as the old German Shepherd patiently demonstrated simple obedience exercises, never demanding attention, but always earning it. Ethan often smiled while watching newcomers assume Rex must once have been an ordinary family pet. They could not imagine the storms he had survived, or the lives he had quietly protected. One crisp autumn afternoon, a school bus stopped outside the center. A group of elementary students climbed out, accompanied by teachers and several military veterans who volunteered with youth programs. Among them was a little girl with freckles across her nose and auburn hair tied into 2 loose braids. She walked slowly toward Rex before kneeling carefully a few feet away. "Is he friendly?" she asked. "The friendliest old soldier you'll ever meet," Ethan replied. The girl extended one small hand. Rex approached at his own gentle pace, before resting his head beneath her fingers, exactly as he had months earlier, beside the military memorial. The child smiled with quiet delight, and several veterans watching nearby wiped away tears they hoped no one would notice. One elderly Marine finally whispered, "Some heroes never wear medals." Ethan heard him. He looked toward the ocean stretching beyond the training fields. Claire Morgan's name still remained absent from public memorials. Many operators listed inside the archive would never tell their stories. Even Black Tide itself would become little more than a classified chapter hidden inside government records. Perhaps that was enough. Not every victory required applause. Some required only that ordinary people could once again live ordinary lives without ever realizing who had protected that possibility. Winter eventually gave way to spring. The harbor awakened beneath clear blue skies as fishing boats returned to familiar routes across calm Atlantic water. Wildflowers appeared along the paths surrounding the training center, and laughter replaced construction noise. Early one morning, Ethan stepped outside, carrying an old red rubber ball. Rex watched from the grass, his ears lifting with surprising enthusiasm, despite the stiffness in his aging joints. "You ready?" Ethan asked. The German shepherd wagged his tail. Ethan threw the ball across the wide green field overlooking the harbor. For a brief moment, Rex looked exactly as he had years earlier. He ran, not with the effortless speed of youth, but with every ounce of strength still remaining inside him. His paws crossed the grass steadily. His silver muzzle lifted proudly into the morning breeze. He reached the ball, picked it up gently, and turned toward home. Ethan stood waiting with a smile that carried no sadness, only gratitude. When Rex finally returned and placed the ball into his hand, Ethan knelt beside his oldest friend, resting his forehead lightly against the dog's. "We're home now, old friend." The morning sun climbed higher above the harbor as the camera slowly pulled away. The lighthouse stood quietly in the distance. Fishing boats drifted peacefully across the sparkling Atlantic. Children's laughter echoed from the training field. And two old partners, who had once survived storms, betrayal, and war together, remained exactly where they had always belonged: home. Thank you for staying with Ethan and Rex until the very end. This story reminds us that miracles do not always arrive with thunder or blazing light. Sometimes, God answers our prayers through ordinary acts of courage, through faithful friends who refuse to leave our side, and through quiet strength that appears exactly when hope seems lost. Claire gave her life so that the truth could survive. Ethan chose compassion over revenge. And Rex proved that loyalty is one of God's greatest gifts, a love that asks for nothing in return, yet gives everything. Perhaps all of us carry storms that no one else can see. But even in the darkest night, God can still guide us toward the lighthouse. He can turn heartbreak into healing, fear into courage, and endings into new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, or share the name of a dog, a friend, or someone who has been your faithful companion through life's hardest moments. If you enjoy stories of courage, faith, loyal dogs, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. May God bless you and your family with peace, good health, strength, and faithful companions. May His light guide your path, protect your loved ones, and remind you every day that you are never truly alone. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next story.